All right, welcome to AgileThought Digital Velocity Summit. And at this session, or for this session, we're going to have a fireside chat for Agile outside of IT. And oftentimes when we think of Agile, it's thought of in the IT space. Everyone's very familiar with Agile being for IT teams, exclusively for software development, those types of things. But it has been proven and demonstrated in different ways that Agile is very applicable to areas outside of IT. And so one of the areas that we're going to talk about today with our guest from PwC is finance. So before we jump into that and before we introduce our guest, I just want to mention really quickly, if you have any questions, ask them in the Q&A feature. Just so that you know, the polls to chat in the community are disabled, but Q&A are enabled during the session. So we will go ahead and proceed. So for our guest that we have here today, we have Thomas Alexander, also known as Tom, Victoria Motes, and Adam Ulery. So we will go through and we're going to let each person introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to get started. So let's start with you, Tom.
Sure thing. Hey, everybody. My name is Tom Alexander. I'm a U.S. firm controller at PwC. I had the bright idea of, or was inspired by an agile operating model by some articles that I had read, and decided to deploy that or consider that for how we operated in finance. So we have an interesting journey to share with you and look forward to doing that.
Thanks, Tom. Welcome. All right, Victoria.
Hey guys, I'm Victoria Motes. I work for Tom. I help lead a team called Idea to Innovation within our finance department, and our job for the last 5 years has been to help bring these transformational ideas to life. And so that has looked like a lot of different things through the years, but over the last year or so, that has been this agile mindset and adoption of this way of working. I'm happy to say that Tom listened to us when we said we couldn't do this alone. So we were quickly guided by our AgileThought friends and one of my favorite people, Adam, who's here today.
Awesome. Great segue. All right, Adam.
Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Ulery. I'm an enterprise agile coach with AgileThought. I have 19 years of technology business experience. Over 15 of that is agile experience. And I really love to focus on business agility with leadership, agile portfolio management, and scaling agile. And I did lots of that with Tom and Victoria and their organization at PwC. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of the insights we have with you.
Awesome. All right. And I am Quincy Jordan. I am a director within the Innovate practice at AgileThought. I have many years of experience with transformation in the Agile space, as well as many other spaces. I specifically just really enjoy transformation stories and transformation, like just seeing that process happen, seeing something go from what it could be into what it actually becomes, or seeing the thinking change and how decisions change within an organization. And so I'm really interested, and I really want to hear more about what was going on at PwC and what's the backstory, what happened, what business problems were you looking to solve? So Tom, Victoria, Adam, just lay it out for us.
Yeah, I'll start. So thanks, Quincy. Look, we've been through a large-scale finance transformation, and we started about 5 years ago. And what we had done was build some large-scale automation tools. We had upskilled our workforce, so we had really moved into the digital space and empowered our team to learn how to work with desktop automation tools, work with visualization tools, and the like. So we were getting to the digital space. The result of some of that was we were able to build automations that took out 75% of our offshore delivery. We invested that into a data and analytics center of excellence. We achieved amazing results with our finance transformation. But I've got to tell you, something was missing in all of this. in that we were still, even after doing a total reorganization and transformation, operating in silos. There was still confusion around what our priorities were. There was no transparency to what those priorities were. We weren't working together in cross-functional teams and probably bringing the best value that we could to some of the solutions we were being asked to provide by leadership. And for all of those reasons, I knew that I needed to do something, but I couldn't really peg what it is until I started to do the research around what Agile and an Agile operating model could provide for you. So that's a lot of background. That's 5 years of history that culminated into, is there really one way to solve this problem? No, but I thought that this one gave us a pretty good shot.
All right. Thanks, Tom. All right. So when you're looking at the business problem that you were looking to solve, there are different perspectives on that business problem. So I would imagine Tom has kind of one perspective from his vantage point. Victoria, how did you see the business problem that needed to be solved from your vantage point?
Well, I saw a lot of what Tom alluded to, but to boil it down, we just struggled to get to done sometimes. A lot of people had a lot of really great ideas, and we would talk about them a lot, and we'd do these fun sessions, and we would try to solve all of our problems at once. And the reality of a project plan hits, and there's a ton of other things in your backlog that you have to get done at the same time. And we struggled to balance all of that effectively and to bring the right level of visualization and conversation to the table and help leaders like Tom understand the pros and cons of moving on one thing maybe and stopping something else. So Agile helped really bring a lot of that conversation to light. And it also helped us maintain ourselves as a great group to work for. I think we've given a voice to the people in a way that we'd tried in the past, but this brings it into the strategy conversation and not a nice to have, it's a necessity. So those are just some of the things I noticed.
Awesome. Thanks, Victoria. All right. So along that path and going along that journey, Tom mentioned about aspects with leadership, and kind of part of what I heard that sound like Agile adoption, within leadership. Adam, as the Agile coach that was guiding them, coaching them, what were some of the things that you saw that was very instrumental with helping the leadership to adopt Agile?
Yeah, Quincy, when you first come in, you're trying to observe and get the lay of the land and really kind of understand a true picture of what's going on there. They had a lot of self-awareness about the things they both just mentioned. So you don't always see that actually, but they understood what some of their bigger problems were. They were just trying to find the best way to solve them. But one thing I noticed that would help them pretty early on was their leadership teams didn't work together as a team, right? They worked together, but more as individuals, and there's a bit of a nuance there. And I knew that for us to do some of the next things we wanted to do, which was form a portfolio structure, form a program level structure, and then form these cross-functional delivery teams and align all of that stuff to each other, the leadership level really needed to work well together. So one of the first things I started to work on with them was that, and just kind of getting them to practice working together as a leadership team.
Nice. So as a coach, I can really see how you saw the needs, you helped to come up with a structure for the needs. But I am very curious, how did you get, and this question is open to everyone, how did you get the organization to support this initiative? How receptive was the organization? Because if you had leaders that were somewhat working in silos, how did you break down some of those silos Tom, what were some of the conversations you were having with, either your peers or other leaders, to help remove some of that to be more effective?
I think Victoria touched on some of this, and it was the fact that we didn't have to get everything done at once, that we were going to try to prioritize and limit what we put in process. So limiting our WIP is what we said. So the advertisement was more around, how do we get to balance? Like, how do we prioritize producing cool stuff, things that leaders want and people that access finance tools in the firm want, with balancing our workload? We only have a certain supply of people. We have a demand of work coming in. How do we visualize that, see it, and drive balance? And empowering them in that way to work through that themselves at their program levels with their teams is now giving a voice to everybody around the workload about what is going to get done, what is going to get started, and that changes the conversation. So we wanted to make this fun. We wanted to make it about the people, and we were empowering folks to lead. We always say lead at all levels in finance, where they would have a voice then in what we are working on and how long it would take, quite frankly. So we put some different measures in place, but we've always tried to empower people, and they don't always want to take it, especially in finance, a finance function that had been just hierarchical by nature and historically when I took over the function, and a good chunk of the function. So working through that was not necessarily in our DNA, but now we were giving that power to the people, and that created a whole different culture, the shift that we were looking to make.
Interesting. So, it's, when I think about different agile journeys and transformation journeys, we see a lot of good things happening, and overall, great things do take place. But I also look at it as being a little similar to, like, the transformation is almost like your child, and this is not always pretty the whole time. There are different parts of the journey that may present some challenges. And as I was listening and thinking about empowering the teams, sometimes that's a challenge. As you mentioned, sometimes they don't want the power, and then other times I've seen where they want it, but middle management may not know how to work with that empowerment. So did you all experience anything along those lines? What did that look like? What did you see, Victoria? What did you see, Adam?
Yeah, I think so. We did. Something Tom mentioned, he talked about visualizing the work. That has been a huge game changer. It sounds simple. It is not that easy to visualize the work of 200 people. It took a little time. But with that comes a different level of accountability. And with those conversations comes a new level of accountability to not only look after your team, not only look after our organization, but to look after the firm. And I think it takes quite a bit of coaching to help people shift that mindset from, I've always done it this way, I shouldn't have to explain why, this is just the way we do things, to every single piece of work needs to have an explanation. We need to know who this is for. We need to know the value so we can appropriately help make those decisions as far as what's most important next. And so it opened up a world of conversation that I think brought a new level of transparency, but also accountability to the conversation, which can be hard to step into sometimes.
Yeah, and just to go along with what Tom and Victoria are saying, the one thing they really had going for them was a strong vision and some top goals that were appealing to the organization. And so we started to kind of leverage that and get people to really buy into them and share their understanding of them, and Tom did a great job of really repeating or communicating the top vision and the top goal, which then creates buy-in, because once the organization starts to share ownership of wanting to achieve that goal, then they start rowing in the same direction more. And then that helped a lot with the visibility issues that we were talking about. So they didn't have a lot of visibility into their work, but with having shared goals, now they're motivated to see that so they can start to meet those goals. And then we could just work on things like tooling and processes to give visibility to that work. And then now that allows us to start to focus more on implementing frameworks and processes and tools that'll really help align their execution to their strategy.
Nice. And Tom, you mentioned that some of the folks didn't want to take the power with regards to being empowered. And, considering that we are talking about Agile outside of IT, that part may, to your point, have been very different for finance folks. Can you elaborate on some of those challenges and what it took to overcome some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a lot here, just based on who finance folks are as professionals, right? So Victoria mentioned some of this, but you're talking about a group who think about accounting rules and policies and procedures and, accounting techniques and methodologies and the rules-based structure of all of that versus what Agile is just by its nature, what the word even means, right? Being able to pivot on a dime, being able to respond to the new world, to new technologies that come out. Like, we're talking about really taking a group that was challenged just by nature of who they were into the mix here. So you could say hierarchy, you could say a bunch of different things. This was just going to be a challenge. But what they did understand was that a system of events and getting better and institutionalizing continuous improvement as we constantly talk through huddles and retro meetings and work management meetings and putting some structure around all of that, they understood how that could work for them. They understood the concept of a leader offering to them to be a roadblock clearer. So I always say my new role is as a roadblock clearer for them. So you guys say we can't do that thing right now, or if somebody's asking you to do something, I say, well, have we really pushed that with that stakeholder? I'm willing to take that on. Let's ask the question. Let's say no, or let's say not now. And that gives you guys more time, creates more space for you to be innovative, to create cool stuff. So they understood some of that, as far as, oh, these are the new roles that we're playing. And now that gives me more courage because I know somebody has my back, or I'm not going to have to do all my old work and do this transformational stuff too. Someone's trying to clear space for me. And it's a constant battle that we're fighting. It's a constant battle that we're fighting. But I think, those are just highlighting some of the challenges that we had. And then, as far as what we can do differently, every time, this comes up, this slips our mind a lot, but rewarding the right behaviors is what we need to keep doing. So communications throughout this entire journey and saying, here's a great story. Here's what this team did. So team behaviors. Here's how we want to highlight that for everybody. And look what they were able to accomplish by working together across silos to put this great thing together. Putting this stuff aside, putting the whip aside, the roadblock was cleared so they could go do that work. Those are the kind of stories that we need to keep highlighting so the behaviors then multiply.
Nice. And you said so much that was so important. And one thing that really stood out to me that I heard you just say was you had to clear space for the teams to be able to be empowered, for them to feel empowered, for them to be able to operate in an agile environment. And I think that is so important. It's such an important part of a transformation that you have leadership in place that will, as you put it, clear the space. They will help to make the environment an agile ecosystem that people can thrive in. And that is just so critical. And so as I think about that and as I envision that and I hear the things about limiting the whip and empowering the teams, and there are hundreds of PwC folks, that were part of the organization. Immediately, I start thinking scaling, and I start thinking, okay, that's great to do it with, one pilot team, but how did you scale? What did scaling look like? How did you go beyond where you started and into something more? So could you tell me more about the scaling aspect of your Agile journey?
Yeah, I think, and Victoria, fill in any blanks here, but I think one of the most important things that we do just to drive scale and to make sure that everybody understood the behaviors. Well, one, the communication strategy, which I already mentioned. Okay, so continuing to highlight those stories, you can't do without that. But you also have to set alignment at the very top from the start so that everybody understands what is your objective here. Okay, so we have a strategy. The firm has a strategy. We have an objective that we want to accomplish this quarter. Let's make sure we know how that ties back all the way to the firm strategy. Where do we stand in our little piece of the world here? And that kind of alignment, which we use, an OKR technique, I'm sure many of you do as well, but we set our objective for every quarter, and we put measurable key results under that. So metrics that actually say that we're going to achieve the objective, a common Agile practice. So we do that every quarter, come together as a leadership team. We make sure that we set that goal out. And what it allows us to do is to learn all around the same objective, all try to measure together, all make sure that we're making progress, even if we don't make those key metrics that we've laid out. And that's how we've scaled and aligned all of our different teams, which some are paying payroll, some are doing accounting. They're all different in what they do, but they're all aligned to that objective and key result at the top. So that's one way that I think we've scaled effectively.
Just to add to that, as we think about that leadership team, one, just the fact that we have measures to indicate whether we've hit a strategic goal or not is a game changer. I think we always, strove for something, but it was hard to know when you got there. So these measures have made a big difference across the organization. But we also had support from leaders to find the space to become more cross-functional and to lean into the learning side of creating space. So we shifted our organization to be aligned by value delivered to the customer. So we created these value streams who were self-organizing, and we had tried to infuse those value streams with different skill sets that would be critical, like technology, innovation, compliance. Rather than having separate teams that do that thing, we're bringing those folks into the value stream to solve the business problem. So we're allowing them to be a bit more cross-functional, hopefully reduce dependencies. And we had to give some space and time for people to work in a new way. So aligning that time and capacity toward things like cross-training was critical for us to ultimately be successful.
Nice. So when I hear cross-training, I hear some coaching aspects behind that. And so Adam, what were some of the things that were instrumental with helping with getting the cross-training to happen, making sure that teams, as they were cross-training, they still were able to stay focused and not get distracted at the same time? So is there something that you can share around that?
Yeah, one of the things that really helped them be successful with this is they really started to shift their culture. And that's extremely difficult to do in a very well-established large enterprise, right? But within their organization, they started to really transform from a culture of command and control and hierarchy, and getting it right the first time, and those types of things, to really moving more towards a learning organization. They started to really value continuously improving, learning, leading rather than controlling, right, or managing. And those things allow them, they kind of, enabled them to then follow these practices that they were talking about with, forming cross-functional teams, and then, putting a process in place where those teams are able to collaborate and deliver the work together. So, that mindset shift was so huge. And so we worked on that a lot. And, I think that's the fact that Tom and Victoria and their organization was willing to do that and put that hard work in to something like mindset that's not so tangible, I think was a big factor in their success.
Nice. And so as I'm hearing the level of collaboration that sounds like was happening, and one of the things that I often think is overlooked, that you guys nailed, is ensuring that folks at the team level can really see how the work that they're doing on a daily basis rolls all the way up to that top line objective. Like, that is so important. And, it can seem like, oh, okay, well, people are just doing their job. They're just doing their day-to-day work, right? But it makes a difference, when a team member can see, wow, this thing that is so important to Tom as our leader, I see how I am contributing to that thing. And I see how that thing is not only contributing to what Tom as our leader wants, but how it's contributing to PwC overall, the bigger picture there. And all of those types of things, to me, just helps us to really start focusing more on not only the day-to-day work that's happening, but really the overall business outcomes that we're looking at, so that teams are no longer just trying to really put out as much work as they can without really understanding why that work is important. And so when we're thinking about business outcomes and having this agile perspective, what would you say, is different now around the mindset, around being focused on business outcomes, maybe versus just outputs? Is there anything that you could share along those lines with the business outcomes?
Yeah, Quincy, maybe I'd like to answer that question in the form of a story. Okay, so let's go back to February, March, which will resonate with everybody, last year. Okay, where we all were.
Because something happened around that time, right?
Where we all were, and where we were all trying to more agilely respond to something we never expected to happen. Okay. So what did we do immediately? We used Agile to create an unbelievable experience with remote work, I would say, first of all, because what it did was we had the system of events that I just mentioned around daily huddles, and we were doing a podcast once a week. We were communicating through our system of events, retros. We were set up for remote work because we had institutionalized it. But the OKR that we set really, took it to the next level. So our OKR coming into the last quarter, we have a 6/30 year end, last quarter of last year for us, was that the controller operations organization was going to be a key contributor to the pandemic response by PwC as a firm. In other words, as we were trying to scrape every penny, every cash collection, make sure that our payroll was paid in accordance with the new rules that were coming out, that we were looking at our real estate, that we were making sure that our balance sheet was healthy, that we were going out to the banks to get potentially additional financing, all of the different things that you have to consider when a catastrophe hits. We had to be agile and pivot into that. And we wanted to be on offense with all of that and be a major contributor. So we set the OKR that way. We set measurables out there, and it let everybody right away know, like, put away this other stuff. What we need to do right now is respond to the issues that the world is having. and that the world is trying to address.
Yeah.
So we were all launched into action around that. We doubled down on that as it went through different quarters where, we then looked into the next quarter. We said, you know what, our operating model right now, we learned from that quarter, wasn't set up correctly. So we said, we're going to pivot. So next quarter, let's nail the pivot. We restructured some of our teams in the way Victoria described, where we put experts within the teams so that they could get work done at kind of the value stream or program level. We then said, hey, we're trying to do too much. So our next OKR was raise the bar. We're going to raise the bar as in we're moving the line up because we're going to prioritize less because we're trying to do too much at once. We don't have the capacity in this kind of COVID environment to get all this work done. So some pretty awesome stories around we were all focused on doing these things for the firm, supporting the firm, getting structured the right way, and limiting our whip so that we could get more done by virtue of doing less. And everybody understood the role that they played within all of those.
Nice. It's it was kind of interesting to me how, you had so many organizations going into, that March timeframe before the pandemic hit that, said, well, we'll ease into this remote work thing, maybe over the next 6 months, 12 months, like prior to the pandemic. Like that's what a lot of folks were thinking. And, and maybe we'll have our agile transformation, maybe we'll do it over the next 12 months and so forth. And yeah, that February, March timeframe hit and it accelerated everyone. Everyone's transformation got accelerated, whether they wanted to transform or not. We all had to do it. And so, I found that to be, really, really interesting. And along those lines, things had to change. And so how did you see, and this question is open for everyone, but how did you see behaviors shift that may have been different because an agile mindset had already taken root prior to? How did you see the mindset shift in that help? I know Tom mentioned about some things, but I'm just wondering if there's more there to pull on.
I could touch on that, Quincy. I think Tom alluded to it. But had we not done that groundwork and had the leadership team really not leaned into the mindset of Agile, I fear we may have approached this as we just have to get this all done. And instead, the conversation was, we can't do everything at the same time. So how might we prioritize this to be a key contributor in the pandemic response, but not let other things go? And just that nuance in the way you ask that question opens the door to creativity and to different possibilities of how we might respond. So I think just the way we approached the problem was different because of that groundwork that we laid. And I'm really grateful that that worked out for us. I mean, I feel for the people who are listening to this that maybe didn't have that situation. But for us, we had started in October, so we had a few months behind us before things really ramped up. I think that really helped. We also really leaned into our coaches at that time and shifted toward having them embedded in the teams. So it was really important that we didn't lose our traction and our momentum in this agile way of working, but we wanted to meet people where they were at. And maybe they can't go to this training where they would have learned about Agile, but why don't we come sit with you all and hear about the problems you're trying to solve today? And let's make sure we're taking an Agile mindset to solving that problem. And that's when we really started to get some momentum, I think, and people being bought in was when they could see how it impacted their day-to-day work for the better.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I really saw the leaders modeling good agile behavior and starting to make that shift I was talking about a little bit earlier, but they were certainly acting more as servant leaders and giving control, not taking control at a time when it was probably most uncomfortable and they most wanted to take control and, handle this thing that we're all going through that's scary, right? But by not doing that and kind of leaning into what they were learning and practicing that stuff, then they started to see the things that Victoria was talking about with people coming up with creative solutions. And then that sort of further reinforced what we were teaching them, which was if you give people close to the work the autonomy to come up with solutions, they'll surprise and delight you with some of the things they come up with. And they started to see that and then realize, oh yeah, that does work well. And now I can step back and think more strategically, which they wanted to do anyway. So, some of those things were really fun to see and watch as they grew.
Awesome. So, as I'm hearing different things and I'm just starting to wonder, what is the longer term goal on rolling out into other parts of PwC? If doing things this way, having this agile mindset, focusing on business outcomes, really going towards business agility, if those things are so beneficial to you all's area within PwC, is there a longer term goal? Is there a bigger goal to maybe roll out working in this way to other parts of the organization? And if so, what do you think that might look like?
I think, one of the key tenets of Agile is always to deliver value quickly. And if you think about the nature of the business that we run, just being, a consulting firm or auditors, tax, providing that kind of advice to a client, that really resonates with people. So the sooner you can add value to a client, the sooner you become that trusted business advisor to them. So we've already seen this starting to permeate. The language is starting to come through, even if it's not really called out as Agile, but you're hearing some of the key terms that we have learned over time just kind of sneak its way naturally into the business. Where I've seen it overtly implemented is our IT function kind of started it. We were very close behind them. And now we're actually having different conversations with our IT function because we understand very well what we're both trying to accomplish, even so far as to establish some cross-functional Scrum teams between our data and analytics center, our systems architecture team within finance, and our IT function that closely supports us. So it's starting to you're starting to see maybe the theory where would this go? Maybe some of these, organizational lines start to blur a little bit between the functions in the future. So client service delivery, certainly, I think some of the functions are going to start to come together. And the last example I would share is I was in a diversity inclusion council meeting today where we were going through with our purpose and inclusion team in Tampa. And what they were trying to do was to limit their WIP because we had so many opportunities that were coming at us. So I heard things like MVP. I heard things like alignment. I heard things about an overall objective for the team so that all of the inclusion networks could align to the overall Tampa purpose and inclusion team. And I'm like, this is starting, people don't know it, but it's starting to happen. So whether naturally or on purpose, it's happening at PwC.
And maybe to brag for Tom for a second, I mean, the word's getting out in our advisory practice as well. And we've had the opportunity to collaborate with them on some really exciting different initiatives, and clients are asking.
Oh, they certainly are.
Oh, wow.
They certainly are. And where they're asking is around any transformation program. So, we go out and we talk to folks about, we have this story that we can tell around our own finance transformation. And they say, well, you got some great results from that. How do you govern all this change? We want to make some big changes and we have some big projects out there, but everybody's so busy doing what they're doing. How do we break them free, clear space for them to work on this stuff? And we say, well, maybe you should try this. And if we had to start all over again, we would have rolled this out earlier in our process. So having that agile operating model, the prioritization, that would have helped us very early on.
Awesome. So when you say you would have rolled it out earlier in the process, and I'm thinking, also about, the types of things that may have given PwC or may give PwC a competitive advantage. And I'm not asking for you to share, secrets that make you guys so great. But what are some of those other things that you all would suggest that organizations do if they're starting on their Agile journey. Victoria, you mentioned how instrumental it was that because you all had started in October, that when March came around, you were in a much better place, to be able to pivot and adjust. So what advice would you give to other organizations that are starting on their Agile journey?
Want me to jump in?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You kick this one off.
Well, Tom and I have talked about this a lot. What would we have done differently looking back? I think we were type A go-getter people who wanted to plan. And I think that the reality is that you have to understand the mindset, but begin to work in those mechanics, even if they make you uncomfortable, even if you don't fully get it. I think practice makes perfect with this kind of thing. And you just have to practice with these different mechanics that you're learning in this Agile way of working and dive in and just try it. And then realize that you're going to have to make changes to meet your teams where they're at, and to help it stay as a great place to work for your organization. It's about finding that middle road that is going to work for you. So that was difficult to really comprehend at the time, but looking back, we would have jumped into the mechanics quickly and started practicing sooner so that we could make it work for us.
Yeah, we had some really we had some really lousy OKRs when we started this, but we couldn't have had great OKRs until we had the lousy ones. So if you start into the discipline of setting them, of setting organizational goals like that, of keeping it to a tighter time frame so that you make sure that you're making progress incrementally. You measure it. You get people into the mindset of measuring. Not everything has a budget that goes on forever. And we're not going to endlessly invest in one specific initiative. So start having that mindset, and then you start thinking more about ROI. And these things they spin themselves up into producing great things because you're having the right conversations. Everybody's thinking as a business person, and they're thinking at the very lowest level to do that. I would call out also, just trust and safety. And we're still dealing with this, a little bit. But safety to me, and safety, we're not talking about, wearing hazmat suits into the office now that COVID's floating around. We're talking about in a meeting where everybody has a voice and their opinions can be listened to and considered, because you cannot say that I'm empowering you as an organization to go through your own body of work without creating safety and space for them to say, I need a roadblock cleared. I can't do that right now. I need help over here. This person's out next week and needs to go on vacation, and we can't do that right. Like, you have to create the space as a leader and safety to be able to transfer information, share information with each other. If you're going to go into this with a traditional hierarchical approach and management structure, then you will fail at this. It has to be the empowerment. It has to be give this to the team and let them work it out amongst themselves. So that's the mindset we're trying to drive, and it is a challenge. It's a challenge.
Yeah, and it really reminds me of, one of the things that we hear a lot, people say in the industry of fail fast, so fail fast. And I like to add to that, fail fast and learn faster. And so, Adam, as the coach working with PwC, how did you see failing fast and that whole concept and the iteration? Tom talked about, well, the OKRs, they didn't start out great, but they became great. And that's a key part, as he said, you can't get to the greatness without kind of going through some of that stuff that wasn't so great. So what did you see, and what are your reflections there, Adam?
So it's a super talented, super smart group of hard driving, high performance people who don't like to fail. And so what as a coach, what you have to do is sort of put things into terms that they can relate to and that will resonate with them, and that will kind of help them see where you're trying to get them to go, right? So, just coming in and saying we want to fail fast, and I'm not sure how much that would resonate. But when we talk more about, let's learn, and get better. Let's continuously improve. Well, they love that, right? I mean, they're high performers. So the idea of always getting better is very appealing. Um, you know, learn by doing. Again, now we're talking about taking action, and they love that. You know, so those are some of the things that we were talking about. And once they really understood the benefits of this in practice and could see it happening, then they were fully bought in, and now use the terms themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to hear someone who's not a coach talking about creating safety, right?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yes. Can I just add something to Adam? So, and then Adam came in with somewhat of a template, which we love as accountants, but also a Jedi mind trick, which was the implementation of the experiment template. Okay. So we now have kind of an experiment template to follow where we can put some of these initiatives that we're talking about into this concept of a scientific experiment, which, doesn't really lead to failure because it was just an experiment. Okay. So just changing the mindset around, we're going to compartmentalize this thing, and it's not failure if the tool doesn't work or if this isn't the thing for us. It's just that we were experimenting with it and we created space to do that. So that's new to finance. Like, we haven't run a lot of experiments in finance historically. So now, we've established that mindset.
Wow, and Adam can tell you I am so big on running experiments that I am almost glad you didn't say this 40 minutes ago, because we might have only talked about that. I'm not sure. So we're almost right at the time. I would like to go around and just ask each of you if you had to share just one thing that you would say stood out or stands out the most for those starting their Agile journey. What would that one thing be?
I've got one.
Go ahead, Victoria.
I would say listen to your people.
Yep.
This doesn't have to be that thing that you do in the executive boardroom all by yourself in a silo. It should be that thing that you're hearing from a staff advisory council, from people on the ground, and listen to them because they understand the challenges that you're up against maybe better than you do. And they're dying for that opportunity to share that. So opening that door could be a game changer.
Yeah, that's huge.
That is awesome.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, autonomy is how people are motivated, right? So when you give them that autonomy to go experiment and to go work through their own stuff, that's how you create inspiration. So that's a great one. I would say, as a leader of this group, like, being well read. So, like, I carry this around everywhere. I always annoy Victoria with it. Like, this is, you got to do the research. There's plenty of books. Adam gave us like 15 books to read. I made it through about 3 of them. But, like, you can really study up on this stuff and give them the reason why. And there's so many, like, you heard us talk about it today. There's so many reasons you can inspire a group to do this and to be good at this. It makes all the sense in the world for the body of work that we have and for the amount of change that the firm goes through all the time. You have to be agile, and if you just think about it that way. So I think as a leader, continue to inspire them and inspire by living the behavior. Be agile. Clear the roadblocks. Go be that roadblock clearer so you give them space to do all the things we talked about, experiment, and create cool stuff.
That is awesome. And what about you, Adam, from the coaching perspective with PwC?
Be curious, stay open-minded and be open to trying, to learning, to taking action, and don't, kind of close off the mind to that. And that'll really open your world up to some powerful new things.
Awesome. Well, folks, there you have it. Listen to your people, clear the path, and be curious. I love it. It is awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We really hope that you got a lot of value out of our panelists today and our discussions. So we really appreciate everyone joining. Thanks again to you, Victoria, Tom, Adam. We really appreciate it. And thanks for sharing your PwC stories.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Having
Quincy.
us. Yeah. Good luck, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.